So thank you for joining the Farm to School 2023 census meeting. We'll go to the next slide. So presenting today, we have Ashton Tongo from USDA. We also have Allison Bell from USDA, myself, Taylor Schorsch, and then Sarah Smith, the Farm to School specialist. The agenda, we're going to be discussing what is the Farm to School census, what we learned from the 2019 Farm to School census, what does the census ask? Actually, are these the poll questions, I believe? If you want to pull up the poll, how you can participate in the census, what resources are available to support you, and who can help respond to the census, and then current Nebraska Farm to School updates. So we just have a poll that should have popped up for you. So if you want to answer what your experience with this Farm to School census is. Awesome. So it looks like a lot of us are beginners, or this is the first time completing the census. A few of us are intermediate who have maybe did the 2019 one, but that's awesome. Thank you for participating in that. Go to the next slide. Awesome. I'm going to turn it over to Allison.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Taylor. Hi, everyone. My name is Allison Bell. I am a farm to school specialist with the USDA here in the Mountain Plains region. So really happy to be here with you today. We're going to go over, we've got a big agenda, as you will have seen. It's awesome that so many of you are new to the census. So hopefully this will be clarifying for you. And there should be some time for questions at the end. So I'm going to start off with some of the nuts and bolts on the farm to school census. So what is it? It's a one-of-a-kind national survey that really provides a snapshot of how school food authorities across the country are participating in farm to school activities like local food purchasing, use of edible school gardens. And one thing that we really want to make clear is that you might think that you're not participating in farm to school because you haven't opted into a program or checked a box or signed off on something. But that's not really how farm to school works, right? It is more these activities that we'll be asking you about that are the purchasing of local foods, the use of gardens, other things like that. So you might be doing farm to school and not even know it. So there's a lot of ways that SFAs, those school food authorities, engage with farm to school, and that's captured in this survey. So to get a really comprehensive view of Nebraska as a state, it's really important that all SFAs that were sent this farm to school census fill it out to the best of your ability about all of the activities that you're doing so that we can use that data. This census really does give the big picture of how farm to school is operating in all school food authorities across the country. And because we regularly collect this data every 4 years, it shows how farm to school is growing and maturing over time. And really, hopefully, that this movement of local foods is really growing in our child nutrition programs, specifically for this census, the National School Lunch Program. The 2023 census will be the fourth census conducted by the Food and Nutrition Service, and prior ones include 2013, 2015, and 2019. This census in 2023 will be specifically asking about farm to school activities that occurred in school year 2022 to 2023, and results will show, to the extent possible, the level of farm to school engagement in the National School Lunch Program. All public, charter, private school food authorities that participate in the National School Lunch Program are being asked to complete the census. And all SFA child nutrition directors are invited to complete the census, and contact information was provided to USDA by state child nutrition offices earlier this year. So we can go on to the next slide. Let's see. So what do we do with all of this census data that's collected? Data collected from the census will be used in a variety of ways.
Just put your in and do it on here, and then you can do your.
Sorry, folks, just make sure that you're on mute. Thanks so much. So data collected from the census will be used in a variety of ways, as it provides federal, state, and non-federal partners a sense of where local food engagement is, and how widespread it is, and maybe what kind of activities are most frequently seen. On a larger scale, the census results that reflect high participation in farm-to-school programs can demonstrate for policymakers and regulators the scope of farm-to-school, both nationally and here in Nebraska. To the extent to which schools can impact local food economies, which is pretty exciting. And on a more local level for you all, it helps identify opportunities for expanding potentially farm to school activities in your school food authority and states, as well as the challenges of participating in farm to school. It helps our agency, the Food and Nutrition Service, state agencies like the Nebraska Department of Education, and partners prioritize what they can do to support you all at the SFA level who want to source local foods, provide food and agricultural education, and maybe engage in some of these other farm to school activities. So, as such, the census is a resource for lots of different levels, SFAs, states, other entities, through these national statistics and materials about the farm to school that our agency, the Food and Nutrition Service, produces, and state and SFA level data that's provided on the farm to school website, where school staff, community members, and a lot of other folks can see what your school food authority is responding, how they're responding to that, and how the state as a whole is responding. So the results will provide a lot of different things. Again, evaluation of what SFAs are doing and maybe help find potential partners, a better understanding of school food purchases in a targeted community or state. They'll provide information for use in grant applications if maybe your SFA is going after some grant money to pursue more farm to school activities, and be a key data set for child nutrition researchers across the country. All right, let's go on to the next slide. So this is just a quick snapshot from the last census that we did, which was in 2019. So pre-pandemic. So another reason it's even more important to be filling out this census so we can get a good snapshot of where you all are at, because we know that SFAs were confronted with a lot during the pandemic, right? So this data is a little bit outdated, but let's take that with a grain of salt. But some of the big national headlines that came out of this census were of the nearly 19,000 school food authorities across the country that were sent to the 2019 census, almost 13,000 completed it, which resulted in a response rate of 67%. So that was pretty cool, and that was a really great feat, and we're really hoping that this year, with y'all's help, that we can reach a response rate of 80%. And I know that here in the state of Nebraska, hoping to be a little bit of an overachiever and hit 90% response rate. We think that you all can do it. That would be really, really cool to see and really provide your state with great data. But let's see. So farm to school, what some other things that we're seeing in 2019 is that farm to school is taking root in schools nationwide. Again, like I said, because even if you're not maybe calling it farm to school. If you're procuring something local, if you're getting something out of your school garden, you're doing farm to school. So the weighted results from 2019 revealed that 65% of school food authorities are now engaged in some form of farm to school activity. So that's a great high number. Hopefully with 2023, we'll see even higher. Second, 57% of those SFAs started their programs within the last 3 years. And the growth, so showing that growth of interest in farm to school, and that, like farm to school has really been gaining momentum. Also an exciting number to see. Also, finally, the farm to school activity continues to generate a significant investment in your local economies. So nearly $1.3 billion were spent by SFAs on local food products across the nation, which is really cool to see. We'll go on to some more maybe Nebraska specific numbers. So Nebraska in 2019 had a pretty high response rate of 68% of SFAs, which was great to see. And out of that 68%, 66 said they participate in at least one farm to school activity. So that's really neat. And again, hopefully if Nebraska can reach that 90% response rate, we'll see a similarly high percentage of SFAs that are still participating in farm to school activities. Let's see. I don't know, Sarah, maybe if you can drop the link into the census page in here. So there is on the census page for the 2019 census, you can scroll down to get to your state. You can search by state, and you can search for Nebraska. And then once you're on the Nebraska breakdown page, if you scroll down to the bottom, you can actually then search by school food authority. So you can see if in 2019, if you're new to your district, you can see, what your answers were from your school food authority in 2019, and maybe explore some of the other SFAs that in the state. You can also use that little QR code there to also find the Nebraska page. So we'll go on to the next slide. I think that's one beyond. Can we go one back? Sorry, just to the local level data. Thank you. All right. So yeah, here again, like I said, you can scroll all the way down. You can see that local level data. Important to note that we don't conduct the farm to school census to use results like against SFAs in administrative reviews or anything like that. Farm to school isn't mandated. There's not regulation really tied to it. So it's an encouraged practice. It's something that's good for your school, good for your community. So really this is just to collect data that's going to encourage, again, that momentum of investing in our communities and procuring local foods and providing agricultural education, things like that. All right, let's go on to the next slide now. Thank you. So a little bit more on just the history of this census and how it's kind of evolved over the past decade. It's not something that's super easy to compare because we learned a lot from the first two censuses in 2013 and 2015 to kind of get where 2019 was. And then now a few things have also changed for 2023. But the 2019 Farm to School Census shares a similar purpose and collects similar data to its predecessors from 2013 and 2015. But there were a few key differences in the question design that kind of made it difficult to draw conclusions based on comparisons between the three data sets. So in 2013 and 2015, farm to school participation was determined based on an SFA's response to a question asking about their participation in farm to school activities in general. I think the question was along the lines of, did your district or any schools in your district participate in farm to school activities? Well, we learned from that, again, a lot of folks maybe aren't calling it farm to school, but they are in fact participating in farm to school activities. You're doing them, just maybe not calling it that. So in contrast, we learned from that. And then in 2019, SFA participation in farm to school was determined based on reported participation in a list of 30 different specified activities, including activities that might not always be thought of necessarily as farm to school, like utilizing a geographic preference when you're procuring items, or using USDA team nutrition materials, things of that nature. So thus, some of the SFAs that might not have been counted in 2013 or 2015 were then participating in 2019. Additionally, the 2019 census survey was sent to a broader array of SFAs than in prior years, with the inclusion of RCCIs as well as public, private, and charter schools. Well, the private and charter schools. Public schools had been participating. So again, makes it difficult to compare, but each year is getting better and more complete in the data set that we're collecting. So this is just moving into a little of like farm to school 101. So where do schools purchase local foods? As you're going through the census and you're looking at these questions, be thinking about these things. Like where do you procure your foods? Direct from producers, from your broadline distributors, maybe food hubs or producer co-ops, your local grocery store, processors, DOT Fresh, school gardens, farmers markets. There's probably even more that aren't on here. So lots of ways that you all are getting food into your school, and all important to consider when filling out the census. All right, so for the last slide that I'm going to go through here today is, what does the census actually ask? So there are a lot of high-level topics that the 2023 census covers. So once you get through that first section that asks SFA-specific information, you'll advance to a section that asks more about the different types of activities that your division participated in over time. So depending on your responses to that next session, you'll then be asked some more specifics on the activities that your district was engaged in, which will be covered next. So everyone, regardless of participation in activities, will be asked about their perspectives on benefits and challenges, as well as the types of supports that might make it easier to participate in farm to school in the future. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Sarah Smith from the Nebraska Department of Education, and she's going to go through a couple Nebraska specific items.
Thanks, Allie. Again, thank you all for joining. Don't hesitate to drop questions in the chat box. The goal is to help build your confidence for completion of the census by the end of December 2023. We do have a goal for that 90% completion rate, because that really is where we will learn the most from the data, and it will help frame our priorities moving forward, the training that's needed for school districts, producers, processors, aggregators, and folks that are really wanting to see growth of farm to school in the various areas, whether it be what's happening in the cafeteria or in the classroom and that kind of thing. So thank you all for your willingness to join the conversation today. And we'll have time at the end for your questions too. So just a note that we are continually building partnerships and resources in Nebraska for farm to school. And one of the biggest gaps that we hear is that it's just difficult to make that connection. So we have resources on our website, and we can share links in an email after the webinar, and the slides as well. We'll send out before the end of the week. But there are resources for searching for vendors directly. So you could look on the NDA website for their farmers market and produce vendor search, where you can search for farmers markets, or directly for the producers information. The University of Nebraska with Extension is hosting Nebraska Market Maker, and NDE will be adding a Market Maker plugin to our website in the near future too. Buy Fresh by Local Nebraska and USDA has the local food directories as well. So we'll continue to grow these resources moving forward as the years go on and farm to school continues to grow. A quick snapshot of what's been happening with farm to school. And as Allie mentioned, a lot of times we don't consider the work that's happening in your school districts as farm to school, but it is happening, and we just need to recognize As you bring in maybe donated cucumbers from one of your staff members' gardens, or as you're using local beef and grilling that with your superintendent, or students are visiting a farmer's market, or volunteering in a garden somewhere, those activities are considered a farm to school activity. And so we are seeing continued momentum for farm to school moving forward. And again, the census data will help us apply for other funding sources and move forward with supporting farm to school activity in our state. But you can see there is actually quite a few things happening that are partially funded frequently from USDA farm to school funds, sometimes grant funds, and otherwise other types of formula grant funds and such. One program you might be familiar with that we would encourage you to consider as you look into taking small steps forward into farm to school would be our Harvest of the Month program. We're currently expanding it for early childhood as well right now. And we just recently added Indigenous foods and partnerships with the Center for Rural Affairs. So we've added some animal proteins to this, and we're going to be really focusing on some dry beans as well. It's such an economic driver in our state. So this is an opportunity to look at seasonality in our state and feature those local foods when you have access to them throughout that school year, or through your summer food service program, breakfast programs, and all of those things. So there's a slate of resources on our website. That QR code will take you there, but we'll also share that in an email afterwards. But where there's some opportunities for some classroom connections, there's also recipes that we're building out with the support of some school chefs, and other engaging activities for youth and promotion in your cafeterias. Likewise, Nebraska Thursdays is another promotional tool available to you that you can explore on our website. You can see gearing on the bottom left corner there. This is a Litchfield plate in the middle, and then Overton. Brenda retired this last year, but these are some examples of schools that have celebrated Nebraska Thursdays, which means they're bringing as much local to the plate as possible. So we're trying and needing to capture that information and track it as best we can, which is why this census is so important. It's our one tool that we really do have for gathering that data and reporting it back out. And then just a quick note that many of you participated in our Crunch Off, another way to step into local foods. Each apple in those counties indicate that at least one school district registered to participate in the Crunch Off. We don't have the results back from this competition in our region, where we compete with 8 states to have the largest number of crunches per capita in the state. But we'll have that information back at the end of the month, and we're excited to see how well we did and how engaged we were with the different districts and early care centers and folks in our state. A couple of other quick notes just about farm to school activity in our state. We do have some funds available that we are piloting in the eastern part of our state through the American Rescue Plan Act provided by USDA. They're called Local Food for Schools funding. So I have a picture here from Ralston where they engage their students and they source corn locally, and then those students were involved in shucking the corn and helping get it prepared for use in the kitchen. And then you have a picture here of Lincoln Public Schools, who in October hosted a Nebraska Thursdays lunch, and they made a homemade meatloaf from beef that was sourced from Rake's Beef in Ashland. And so those funds are additional funds that are made available allocated to schools in a sub-award process to purchase local foods. We're gathering data back about what was purchased, in what form, and where it was purchased from, so that hopefully we can use that information as well to share back success stories in our state. But just another opportunity to recognize that farm to school is growing, and we have some more information that we're learning as we move forward each school year. Finally, the last slide I want to use as a touch point on activity happening in Nebraska is, again, focusing on economic drivers in our state. So we have a huge beef industry, we have a dry bean industry, and we are taking the pride and enthusiasm around that industry and building a new campaign focused on classrooms. Specifically right now, we're looking at family and consumer science classrooms that can have a curriculum that's in development now, where they're looking at local plant-based proteins, learning about them and many different subject areas, and then considering recipe development around those. So hoping to really start to bring some empowerment into youth and determining how to learn about local foods and use local foods that could potentially move into cafeterias. So as we think about farm to school activity, recognize what you are doing. You might see cafeteria promotion with POS signage as an option, farmer visits, connecting into classrooms. If you do harvest of the month and adding a PowerPoint in with those classrooms, a taste testing activity. There are all kinds of things that are out there that you may already be doing, but just recognize that these are opportunities to connect to farm to school. And last, I'll make a quick plug for our Child Nutrition Training Academy. Some of you may have previously attended one of these academies. They've been underway for more than 50 years, from what I understand, in partnership with UNL. And so the registration information will open in February, but it's a great continuing education, professional development opportunity to learn about food safety, school nutrition, kitchen math and recipes, customer service for year one, and year two goes into a little bit more of a management training opportunity, but it's a full week that is hosted in June in Lincoln on campus at the university. So just keep that in mind and be on the lookout for that from Nutrition Services at the NDE. And I want to say thank you all for your time and learning about this piece. We're going to dig more into the how-tos for the census, and I'll pass it off to Ashton at this point.
Thank you, Sarah, for going through all of that. I do have a cold, so I will ask you all to bear with me as with my gravelly voice today. But now that you have the background of the census and a little bit more of an idea of what farm to school looks like in Nebraska, I'm going to walk you through the survey in a little bit more detail. The survey was sent out on October 2nd to child nutrition directors. It came from Heather Morrison at this DIR online email listed on the slide. I'll give you a minute to pull it up and open your survey in case you want to follow along, but we'll also share this email at the end of the presentation. And if you had any issues with the link or didn't receive a survey, you'll email this address to tackle that. All right. And as you open the survey, hopefully a couple of you are here and are able to follow along. An introductory page will greet you, and it has a little bit of important reminders about completing the survey. We do advise you to read through this before advancing onto the survey itself, but I'll go over a couple of key points. Please complete the census, even if you think that your SFA and schools do not participate in farm to school. Like Ali and Sarah have reiterated, there's so many things that are farm to school, so many things you don't think about, and we are interested in your opinions, even if you don't participate, if you participate in activities that you might not have thought about as farm to school, or if you have a really robust farm to school program. Some questions might require that you coordinate with other school staff or partners, and multiple individuals can open and respond to the survey using the link that you receive. Feel free to share that link with any partners and ask others to answer relevant questions, but only one person can be in the survey at a time. And for all census survey questions, if you don't know an exact value, just give us your best estimate. The questions are about the last school year, so we do recommend that you review the pre-survey worksheet. It'll prompt you to obtain purchase and procurement records before starting the survey. And if you don't have records, once again, just go back to giving us your best estimate. If you are responsible for more than one SFA, each SFA requires a separate census survey, but if you have multiple schools in a singular SFA, you only need to complete one census survey for the entire SFA. Your place in the survey will be saved if you close the page. When you're ready to return, you can just use the same link and you'll be able to continue where you left off. And once you reviewed this introductory language, you'll go on to the next screen and it will ask you to select which section you wish to complete or the option to exit and return later. And so on the next slide, we'll go over the sections of the survey. So this is just a little bit of an overview. If you are just getting started and this is your first time opening the survey, all 7 sections won't be displayed like they are here. You'll likely only see sections 1 or 2 until they're completed. And based on your response to sections 1 and 2, the other sections will become available. The total time it takes you to complete the census is entirely dependent on your activities and the level of programming that you have within your SFA. I know that they say on average it takes 30 minutes, but this does include SFAs that have no activities and SFAs that have tons and tons of things going on. So take it a section at a time. And if you get a question and don't know the answer, you can always feel free to come back to it. You may have to enter a response to advance to the next question, just depending on where you're at. But you can always skip around and flag things to come back to. Anyone can download the census sample survey at the link here if you want to preview the questions, but it's not the easiest document to follow. So we'll go through each section briefly so you can see what kinds of questions will be answered. So section 1 is starting with the easy part, hopefully. The first questions under this section should be simple for a CN director to answer. When you get to the question regarding your district's NCES ID number, there will be a link that can take you to an external site that will help you find that number. The only farm to school related question in this section pertains to your definition of local within your SFA, and there will be a multitude of options provided for this question. So if you're uncertain of which one to pick, go for the one that seems the most accurate. Section 2 will kind of ask about the activities that take place in your SFA in schools. We're interested in any of these activities that occur, including at the SFA level, at a singular school or at multiple schools across the SFA. There will be a list provided of activities like those pictures on the right on the screen here for procurement, promotion, and education. And for each activity below, this is the language from the survey. For each activity below, please indicate if your SFA or schools in your SFA have ever done the listed activity, done the activity before school year 2022-2023, did the activity last year, are doing the activity this year, and or plan to do the activity in the future. For each row, please choose all that apply. As a reminder, these activities were also asked in 2019, so you can review your division's responses in the event that you are new or curious to see what was entered before. And so even if you have never done or ever planned to do farm to school, continue filling out this section as there will be some follow-up questions for you to answer before submitting. And there's also questions that follow if an SFA no longer participates about why that would be the case and what would have happened, and questions if they don't currently but plan to participate in farm to school. And your answers here, like I had mentioned, will determine the next series of questions that you will be asked. This is just in a little bit more detail, but for example, in the event that you no longer participate, have never done or never planned to do farm to school, your remaining sections will be shorter than those who are actively participating. This shows that your section 3 will go to outcomes and challenges, then jump ahead to wrap up and submission. However, if your SFA is actively participating, you will be asked questions from sections 3 through 7, so it will look different than this slide. And depending on how long you've been with your school division and how kind of involved you are with the bandwidth of farm to school activities taking place outside of the cafeteria, sections 3 through 5 might require that outside help that we had mentioned. Starting with section 3, everyone's asked to complete this regardless of participation. And this series does ask you questions related to the challenges of running farm to school, any kind of disruptions that would have occurred with COVID, and perceived success of serving local foods and offering strong programming. If you're new to your district or farm to school, go ahead and try to do your best with this section. Don't be afraid to ask for partner input or other employees or teachers in schools. And don't even be afraid to connect with another director to help you fill out this section. Sections 4 to 5 are going to ask questions regarding length of participation, grade levels exposed to activities, number of staff dedicated to farm to school policies, and so on and so forth. These can be really great sections to have others jump in on as well. So please share the link with those that you wish to complete these sections, and they'll be able to go directly to the section without impacting the rest of the survey. And that brings us to section 6, which is procuring and serving local foods. This is where the pre-survey worksheet that we have mentioned will be really handy. It'll prompt you to kind of get the appropriate documentation in order to complete this section. And just a fair warning, this section is pretty lengthy and might ask you several questions you don't know the answer to. Like we've said, it's okay to just use your best estimate and complete as much as you can. The table on the left of this slide is from the actual worksheet itself and shows the breakdown of questions that you'll be asked on dollars spent. It asks for total food spending for the entire year. And this first question should not include USDA foods or DoD fresh foods. Do try to pay attention because this does change a few questions down, and the total further down does include dollars spent on both non-local and local foods, and then SCA and local pilot included. From there, it will ask for the total dollar on local, including milk, and then ask for the cost on just milk. There's further questions on total spending that include the USDA foods and the DoD fresh also. As for USDA foods, it can be a little tricky to know what products were grown or processed in Nebraska. Depending on the manufacturer, there might be a state of origin label. But if you're not certain, you can use your best judgment. And for total dollars spent on DoD fresh, I'll provide a couple more details on resources to help with that section. This section 6, because it is trickier, does have some edit checks built in, so it might flag something if the amounts do not add up correctly. And a couple more questions include the type of procurement methods used, characteristics of farms or distributors, top 5 source products, and more. Go to the next one. Yes. And then just a little bit more about this section. You will have another question on the worksheet relating to section 6. And this will talk about the source of local foods. Both the worksheet and the online tool have definitions of these sources if you're not sure of what they are. But for any that you did not source from, so for example, it says food hub. If you did not source from a food hub, you would enter 0, or you can leave the % box empty. For those that you did source from, you would select yes, and then ensure that the total % adds up to 100. If you're not certain on the breakdown, think about the previous questions on dollars spent, and that might help you best identify the source and create an accurate percentage breakdown. On the next slide, there's just kind of a general timeline for the census. I'll let you read through this on your own, but really the one thing to note is that state agencies are listed as having roles throughout this entire timeline, as USDA needs your help with the success of your SFA's participation, and everyone on this webinar does play a role in getting the census completed and encouraging participation. So to finish up, we can go to the next one. Yeah, I will go through just really quickly about some information on tips and resources available to you to help navigate the census. Sarah did mention that the census site is down, so I'm not sure if this QR code will work currently, but if not, hopefully when we send the slides out, the maintenance will be over and you'll be able to access it. But the link will take you to a Farm to School Census resources page. A couple of these resources are geared towards state agencies, but most of them are meant for you, the SFAs. And the Farm to School Census team is actively working to make sure that SFAs and their partners are as prepared as possible. make sure to kind of keep coming back to this page because they have been updating and adding additional resources along the way. If you follow the code and the link, there are a couple of resources that I'll talk about briefly. You'll find the Farm to School Census Quick Facts, which is just kind of a high-level summary of what you can expect with the census. The pre-survey worksheet that I've talked about in detail, that'll really help you get started on that section 6 and get resources and documentation together so that you can accurately answer questions about procurement. And there's a full reference copy of the census survey for SFAs who want to get more familiar with questions that you'll be asked. And then also a set of frequently asked questions regarding completion of the census. There's more resources here, but just know that if you have a question about anything or, something is unclear, this is a great place to start. And then hopefully we can help you from there. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip over the next 2 slides. They kind of detail the checklist and the worksheet, but this information will be in the slides that you'll receive from Nebraska Department of Education. The recording of this will be available by the end of the week on the website, and slides should be shared to anyone who registered by the end of the week as well. And kind of at the end, for those running a really robust farm to school programs, you all know it definitely takes a village. The original invitation to complete the census was sent to child nutrition directors who may be able to answer all the questions from start to finish. However, for some directors, that's not the case, and we can't encourage you enough to reach out to other folks in your school community who might have more precise information about the various census questions. Allie went through the list of the way that this information is used, and so the more accurate, the better. We have said if you don't know, feel free to guesstimate. However, if you think that someone has more expertise in a section of the census, please don't hesitate to reach out to them. You are able to share the link directly, and co-respondents are able to open the survey and navigate to a section that's applicable to them. If you have anyone that you really think will be beneficial, you can kind of prepare them as well by sharing that worksheet with them, and they can then plug answers in to those particular sections as well. The one key thing to note is that only one person can be in the survey at a time, and we do encourage that the child nutrition director should be the one to sort of review and submit the survey once all the sections are complete. And once you finally hit the submit button on your survey, don't keep it a secret. We do encourage you to upload the Farm to School online art on your district's website and social media pages and spread word to your fellow directors. That concludes my section, but I will pass this over to Sarah Meyer to help facilitate any questions that might have come up during the presentation. And please feel free to raise your hand or put anything in the chat that we didn't touch on.
Thanks. We did have some things come up in the chat. I'll kind of ask them out, and then appropriate presenter can kind of get these things answered here. We did have a couple that got answered in the chat. There was one asking about if you receive donations and how to kind of mark those down. Ashton answered that. So donated foods are not included in spending. But whether you receive in-kind donations, put that on as a part of the question on funding forces. So include donations as a part of that question. Do all schools have NCES district ID numbers? Allie answered that. There's a link in the chat if you need to look up what your number is. There was a question on if they can go back into completed sections to correct responses. Allie answered that in the chat as well. So yes, prior to submitting the entire survey, you can go back into individual sections as needed and do edits before you submit the entire survey. Keep looking here. Someone asked if there is a place to check if someone from the school has already completed the census. Do any of the presenters know?
trying to get myself off mute here. We are getting, I want to say weekly, but it's kind of coming in waves. So we are getting updates on completion. We're getting data from national office on who or what completion looks like. We're sending out that information to the state agency. And so I think it's kind of up to Nebraska Department of Ed on whether they're sharing that directly or they're reaching out to you directly.
Yeah, Jan, if you have questions or whether or not your school has completed the census, you can just send me either a chat or an email and I can look it up for you as well.
Thanks, everyone. Renee asked if delivery fees by local distributors or growers should be included in spending amounts. Allie's looking into that right now, it looks like, to try to find the answer. I know we had another question in here. Seems like we've got a little chain going with this one, but trying to help Judy figure out her kind of discrepancies between ESU 1 and handling the other schools in her community. Do you want to continue that conversation here? Is there a direct answer to that? Or are we kind of looking into this more unique case, it looks like?
Judy, I'm not sure if you feel comfortable hopping on to clarify. Feel free to if you think it's I know that we're not super familiar with ESUs. We actually just asked Taylor about this. And so if you have some more details for us, that would be super helpful. But if not, we can look into what you've put in the chat and try and get an answer for you.
Is there a way, because the link I got from Heather is just for ESU 1. So I can't, and when I ask her about doing Wayne Community Schools, because ESU 1, we only serve like 16 to 20 meals a day to them. But I can't get in and do, every time I try and get in, the link goes right to ESU 1. Is there a way to get a link for Wayne Community Schools?
Judy, is there someone else that would have received that link? Like, does Wayne Community Schools have their own like food service director or someone who would have received that link that you could coordinate with? Because
I am the food service director.
You are, okay. Yeah, let's see. Well, I think maybe we can, Judy, maybe you can email Sarah or
Okay.
Taylor, and then we can get looped in to get you connected to the right person.
Okay.
All right, I think that was the chat questions that popped up. If there's any other questions, you can throw them in the chat. Or we have a little bit of time, I think, here if anyone wants to come off mute and ask.
While we wait to see if we have others with questions that come to mind, we will have some incentives and raffles that will be holding soon after Thanksgiving for the folks that have submitted their response to the census. So keep on the lookout for that. And win a salad spinner or a sectionizer or some swag. We have really fun farm to school t-shirts here in Nebraska that everywhere we go, people ask for how they can get one. So we'll be doing those raffles in the coming weeks. And then for those of you that have submitted, or for the schools that have submitted the census, we'll be sending a thank you note out confirming that that information was received by USDA. For those that have started to complete the census, we'll prompt you, we'll send an email from Nutrition Services prompting you to complete the census, saying thank you for starting it. Please get it completed by the end of December. And for those of you that haven't opened it, we'll be sending that email to all of you in our CNP system, encouraging you to open it, begin the census, and reach out for questions that you might have. Just a note here again, don't hesitate to reach out to Taylor or me with questions related to Nebraska. Or if you want help connecting to USDA, we can always loop in our child nutrition director, Katie, as well, just to make sure if we don't have answers, which we very well may not about the census, we will help you answer those questions. But also there's this email here for the direct questions to the USDA about the census. Great questions, though, so far from folks. Were there any questions from out in the audience that we may have missed in the chat box?
One just popped up right here. So the question is, should the food service director fill this out or leader of the FFA program?
The food
I
service
think-
director will be the one that should have received it, and they should fill out whatever is applicable to them, but you can share that link. So if the leader of the FFA program, if there are questions that they could answer better, and the food service director wants their help on those questions, they can share the link to have them collaborate and answer those questions. Ashton, did you have anything to add to that?
Nope, you took the words right from my mouth.
Okay, last chances to ask questions. I think Allie and Ashton hop in if you think there's something we need to cover before we release people. Again, we will send out the slides and links and our contacts as well in an email to everyone that registered for the webinar, and we will post the recorded webinar on our website. So we'll have a link for that as well. And then a note that we do have one other webinar that you've probably seen come through email that we're offering tomorrow for the USDA Farm to School grant, which is currently open. And so that'll be at noon, and the information to register for that, if you're interested, is on our Farm to School homepage, or if you want to watch the recording of it, since it's right in the middle of that lunch hour, you're welcome to do that. But certainly pass it off to partners if you think you have superintendents or educators, nonprofit community partners, or otherwise that might be interested in collaborating with you, that would be interested in watching that webinar. It will also be posted as a recording on our site. Okay, Allie, anything else?
I'm not finding the answer in the FAQs to Renee's question about delivery charges. So I'll talk with someone in our national office so that we can include that answer when you send out the slides.
Thank you. Thank you all for your willingness to participate in the census. Thanks to USDA for their leadership and hosting a Nebraska-specific webinar. And we look forward to learning about how we've grown since 2019 and sharing that data with you in the coming months. So again, reach out if you have questions. Thanks, y'all.